Wake up. Wake up.
Bombed Washington, bombed the White House. It killed the president, installed a harsh military dictatorship, brought in a bunch of economists who drove the economy into its worst disaster in history. Well, that would have been worse than 9/11, and I'm not making it up, it happened. What's called the first 9/11 in South America, namely in Chile.
On the 11th of September 1973, the democratically elected Chilean president Salvador Allende was overthrown in a coup. A dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet was established that ruled Chile until 1990. There was the systematic suppression of all political dissidents. Thousands were imprisoned and murdered.
Who was involved in that first 9/11? It's not hard to find them. Right in Washington and London and so on. But that's off the agenda. That doesn't count. There's a principle of ideology that we must never look at our own crimes. We should, on the other hand, exult in the crimes of others and in our own nobility in opposing them.
The root causes of so-called terrorism will not be solved by increasing economic inequality. If governments really are serious about combating terrorism, then they must start with real structural reform back home. As long as banking empires chase infrastructure and debt deals in pursuit of profit, the West will continue to export injustice through finance. Millions more will be displaced. Terrorism will thrive, and neo-colonialism will continue to end more and more lives around the world.
What's happened is that we have moved from a relatively empty world to a relatively full world. That is, empty of us and all of our stuff to now full of us and all of our stuff. In my lifetime, the world population has tripled. And the populations of other things, of cars, houses, boats, all these other things that put a load on the environment too, just like human bodies, those have vastly more than tripled. So the world is very, very full of what we might call man-made capital. And it's becoming more and more empty of what used to be there, what we might call natural capital.
We are the first generation, we in the rich developed world are the first generation to have got to the end of the real benefits of economic growth. For hundreds of years, the best way of raising the real quality of human life has been to raise material living standards. And that's what's driven the huge rises in life expectancy and increases in happiness and other measures of well-being. But all those have now come detached from economic growth. And although life expectancy continues to rise in the rich world, it's no longer related to the amount of economic growth a country has at all. And the same is true of measures of happiness and measures of well-being.
The paradox is the more we grow, the more poverty we create. Our self-interested economic system seems to be continually missing a trick. So as we keep plundering the Earth's natural capital, is it time to rethink our Western definition of progress?
When I look at the world, I look at it much the way Royal Dutch Shell looks at it. They have one of the best strategic entities in the world, private or public. And Royal Dutch Shell has posited two scenarios. One is called Blueprint and is obviously a planned corporate structure where world leaders get together and they think about things like energy transformation, planetary warming, and dwindling fossil fuels and so forth. The other is called scramble. And scramble is pretty much what it sounds like, too. It's a mess. Interestingly enough, in 2075, the ending year for these scenarios, as I recall, we get to about the same place. It's just that blueprint leaves a lot less blood on the floor. Scramble leaves a lot of blood on the floor as people fight for these resources and so forth.
The reason oil companies are drilling miles under the sea is that the world's easily accessible oil has already been found and largely consumed. Not only are oil supplies dwindling, major new metals discoveries are becoming increasingly rare. 40% of the world's agricultural land is seriously degraded, and ever more volatile yields continue to be unevenly distributed. It may be that the looming environmental threat is not global warming, but the exhaustion of the world's resources.
We're going to have struggles for finding land sufficient to grow the agricultural products for what the United Nations says is going to be a 9 billion Earth population. We're going to struggle over non-renewable fossil fuels as they run out. I think Shell posits about 2075 they'll be gone. And we're going to struggle over things like water and other precious resources that are necessary to our life and to our economy. And this could be, as Shell says, a blueprint affair with world leaders working together to share and share alike. Or it could be a real mess, and Shell, incidentally, bets on the mess.
Just like the baby boomers' failure to look to the next generation, our outdated competitive mentality for a world of depleted resources could have devastating consequences. Our economic setup encourages one-upmanship, competition and comparison, whereas the progress humans have made over millennia has been largely based on cooperation.
In any species, in almost any animal, there is always the potential for huge conflict, because with any species, all members of that species have the same needs, so they might fight each other for food and shelter and nest sites and territory and sexual partners, all that kind of thing. But human beings have always had the other possibility. We have the possibility to be the best source of support and love and assistance and cooperation, much more so than any other animal. And so other people can be the best or the worst. You can be my worst rival or my best source of support.
In a progressive society, to meet our common economic, social and cultural needs, we must move from globalization to localization. The benefits of a communal sense of fellowship, responsibility and purpose in a life driven by production, not consumption, would lead to happiness and satisfaction. Indeed, we must ask, have our modern consumerist lifestyles made us happy?
I think if one had been living in the 19th century and somebody had told you that 100 years later people were going to be living in this extraordinary wealth and comfort, with central heating and being able to throw away such a high proportion of our food as we do, we'd imagine that we'd be living in a state of extraordinary social harmony and everything would be rosy. And it's really quite remarkable, the contrast between, if you like, the material success of our societies and the social failure.
The growth economy demands that we make consumption a way of life. He who dies with the most toys became the ambition, and retail replaced spiritual satisfaction. Unsurprisingly, sales of antidepressants skyrocketed.
The fact is that the world economy over the last few years, a good share of my lifetime, has been built either on the military or on producing items that most people don't need and really don't even want when you come right down to it, but we all got to have them.
Consumerism is driven by our extraordinarily social nature, that we want to have the stuff so we look good in other people's eyes. It's because I experience myself through other people's eyes, the feelings of shame and embarrassment or pride and maybe feeling envied, all those things. So, the goods are just a way of, if you like, mediating the relationship between yourself and others in this extraordinarily alienated hierarchy.
What's really suffered is human relationships, family life, the things that really matter to us. And in the end, the only thing that makes human beings happy isn't money. It's very clear that past a certain level, you only get marginal gains from wealth. What really makes us happy is other people. It's our relationship with other people that's really been damaged by the last 30 years. We trust them less, we have less interaction with them, we bond less than ever before, we marry less, and marriage is under more threat than ever before. And all the associations that represent sort of permanent, unconditioned human affection are being eroded or damaged. And that's the real legacy of the last 30 years. And in some sense, we've got to recover and rehumanize our lives. Otherwise, not only will they be nasty, brutish and short, but they'll be lonely.
The West is coming to the realization that its human project is failing. The West was so convinced that if you push people to achieve as individuals, the accumulated achievement of individuals would make for a successful society. And what the West is now beginning to realize is that the individual achievement without incorporating the vulnerable community is a myth. The idea was make your own life, be individually aspiring, and then you'll be individually achieving, and then you'll be individually prosperous, and then you'll be individually happy. You end up doing that in a glass jar. And the glass jar has a limited height, and it's encapsulating, and in the end you die of lack of oxygen. Human beings are alive because they seek attachment and because they're propelled by affection. So the isolated, achieving individual in the end implodes.
In order to find a purpose in life, it has to be outside yourself. It matters not how you construct it outside yourself, as long as it's a positive value added to society pursued. But it has to be outside yourself. It can't be yourself. If you're pursuing yourself, you're pursuing the abyss, as Nietzsche said. You are going to wind up in the abyss.
One of the most powerful cultural frameworks that shapes the way we think today in the West is the Hollywood film construction. And it follows a particular cultural pattern in that there is a beginning, there is a middle and an end, there is drama, tension, there's resolution, there's usually a goodie and a baddie, and there's usually a story told through the medium of human beings. This Hollywoodization of the way that people communicate and the way they tell stories about themselves and view their recent history has very much impacted how we look at the financial crisis, in that people look at the beginning, the middle and the end. They look at the drama around Lehman Brothers and they wanted, say, a resolution, and they wanted baddies, they wanted sacrificial victims as well. So people have focused on a few individuals. And the idea that somehow it wasn't just one or two individuals who were at the root of the problem, it was a systemic problem, that actually almost everyone who participated was in some way guilty, either of outright negligence or simply failing to ask the right questions or simply failing to ask why money was so cheap for so many years. The idea that it was a systemic flaw is something which is very hard for people to grasp and even harder to depict as a good story.
Perhaps there is this feeling of helplessness because we don't understand what the real problem actually is. Cleansing a few bad apples will not rectify the flaws at the heart of the Western economic system. a system that should be protecting people is in fact